Hello, my name's Evora. I came home without warning and found my sister-in-law standing over my blind father, steam rising from the pot she had just poured down his back. She said it was an accident, but I knew better. What do you do when the people who claim to love your father treat him like a burden? When your brother won't look you in the eye, and your name disappears from every family photo, gift, and story? They told me I was too emotional, that I always made things worse. But what if silence was the real crime all along? Would you stay quiet too, if it meant peace? Or would you burn the house down to save the truth? They say there's always one child who vanishes in every family, not because they ran away, but because the rest of the family slowly learns to live without listening to them. That child was me. I pulled up to my brother's house in Cherry Hill a little after 10 a.m., a calm Sunday morning that carried the weight of anything but calmness. The street was quiet, save for the hum of lawnmowers in the distance and the chirping of suburban robins. I had made the trip here dozens of times, but somehow this morning felt different, heavier. The house looked just as I remembered, a two-story colonial with beige siding, pristine windows, and the illusion of peace. Inside, however, things were rarely as they appeared. My father, Alton, had lived with Dariel and his wife Seraphine for the last 5 years, ever since he lost his sight. I'd offered to bring him to live with me back then, but I was told, in no uncertain terms, "That's not practical, Evora. You work long shifts. He needs stability." They were right, sort of. My shifts as a home care nurse weren't exactly flexible, but I also knew that stability in their language often translated to control, and they had plenty of that. The door was unlocked, which struck me as unusual. Normally, Seraphine kept it bolted, for safety, she said. I stepped inside and called out, "Dad? Dariel?" No answer, just the low buzz of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock. I walked down the hall toward my father's room. That's when I noticed the door. It was locked, from the outside. My chest tightened. I paused, tested the knob again. Still locked. The door wasn't heavy, and the lock wasn't complicated. I pulled a hairpin from my purse, old habit from college, and popped it open in seconds. What I saw turned my stomach. Dad sat in the corner of the room, his hands folded in his lap, head slightly bowed. The curtains were drawn, no radio, no television. The air was stale, tinged with bleach and something else, loneliness. He didn't react at first. It wasn't until I whispered, "Daddy," that he turned slightly toward the sound. "Oh, Evora, you came." His voice cracked at the end, like it hadn't been used all day. Probably hadn't. I knelt in front of him. "When's the last time you had water?" "I think this morning? Or yesterday. I can't tell anymore." I walked to the attached bathroom, bone dry, no glass, no jug. I brought him water from the kitchen, and as I returned, I heard the front door open. "Oh, Evora, I didn't know you were coming," Seraphine said, her tone cheerful, but a beat too high. "The door was locked," I said, keeping my voice low. She blinked. "Was it? Must have been Joran. He loves playing with doors." "A 7-year-old accidentally locking a door from the outside?" "Sure. And I'm Santa Claus." "I found Dad sitting in the dark. He didn't even know where the water was." She laughed gently, brushing off my concern like lint from a blazer. "He gets paranoid sometimes, you know. It's part of the decline. We do our best, Evora." Right. At dinner that night, Dariel brought up the subject that made my blood heat, the long-term plan. "We're exploring some options. Dad's getting harder to manage." "Might be time to consider professional care," he said, buttering his dinner roll as if discussing a new car lease. I set my fork down. "I can help. He's not a burden. He just needs consistency and kindness." Seraphine tilted her head, giving me that look, smile tight, eyes cold. "You live alone. You don't really know what it's like." Dariel chimed in, not meeting my eyes. "Ev, maybe just trust us a little more." "Trust you?" This was the same house I used to come home to from school, where Dad would listen to my spelling words and hum Sinatra as he made breakfast. I was the one who helped him find his steps when the vision first began to fade. I was the one who read to him from Mom's old books when grief swallowed him whole. But now, apparently, I was just the single sister who didn't understand. Later that night, I wandered into the kitchen to make Dad some tea. I reached for the kettle, only to find it shoved far back on the stove, almost unreachable. Odd. I looked down and noticed a bruise on Dad's forearm. It was yellowing, old. When I asked, he waved it off. Tripped, he muttered. My fault. I wanted to believe him, but something inside me wouldn't let it go. The next morning, Seraphine floated the idea like she was proposing brunch. So, I was thinking we could do a family dinner for your father's birthday, just a little gathering. I'll take care of the menu and decorations, of course. Evora, maybe you could help set the table? Set the table. It was subtle. Too subtle, maybe, for someone who hadn't grown up being overlooked. But for me, it rang loud and clear. I nodded slowly. Sure, she beamed. Oh, and I've drafted a short toast. Nothing dramatic, just something nice. She walked away before I could ask, did you mention me in that toast? But I already knew the answer. Later that night, I sat on the edge of the guest bed, holding my dad's hand while he slept. The family dinner was supposed to be a celebration, a way to honor him. But somewhere deep in my gut, I knew the truth. It was also a way to erase me. I stood there long after the toast ended, still holding the glass of sparkling cider no one cared to clink with mine. My father smiled as Seraphine kissed his cheek, the room echoing with polite laughter. I kept my eyes fixed on the tablecloth, willing myself not to react. That was her way, taking up all the space, then making you feel rude for noticing. The following morning, the house was unusually busy. I'd gotten up early to bake Dad's favorite muffins, banana with pecans, the kind Mom used to make, and noticed the smell of expensive perfume lingering in the air long before I heard Seraphine humming. She was already dressed, hair curled, and standing by the dining table arranging name cards like we were hosting a corporate brunch. Morning, I said flatly, pulling the tray from the oven. She turned, flashing that glossy magazine smile. Oh, you didn't have to. We have catering for tonight. I nodded, pretending not to care. But I'm sure Dad will love those, she added, a beat too late. I waited until she left the kitchen, then reached into my tote bag, gently pulling out the talking photo album I had spent the weekend compiling. Each page held a moment. Our backyard campouts, his hand on my shoulder after Mom's funeral, the old recliner where he read every night until his vision faded. I'd recorded audio messages for every photo, my voice describing the memory, the smells, the jokes, the tears. It was meant to be a surprise, a gift only he would truly understand. By the time guests arrived, the house had been transformed. Candles flickered. Jazz played low in the background. Seraphine had done her usual, themed centerpieces, coordinated napkins, a slideshow of Dad's life cycling on the television in the background. Her name was on everything. Even the welcome board read, "Hosted with love by Seraphine Dariel." I swallowed the discomfort and told myself, it's for Dad. When the gifts were finally presented, she stood in front of the crowd, holding the talking photo album, my photo album. I wanted to make something special for Dad, she began, her voice perfectly tuned for a crowd. So I created this, something he can hear and feel. As she opened the album and hit play, my own voice filled the room. Only, it wasn't attributed to me. And the final message, where I'd said, "I'll always be your eyes, Daddy," was missing. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The room clapped. Dad smiled and said, "You always knew what I loved, Seraphine." And I felt like a footnote in my own family. Later that evening, I walked down the hallway toward the restroom. That's when I saw the new family portrait hung proudly on the wall. Dariel, Seraphine, and Joran, smiling in the golden hour light of their last beach trip. No Alton, no me. I stared at it for a few seconds, heart thudding, then pulled out my phone and snapped a picture. Seraphine appeared behind me, holding a glass of wine. "Oh, that?" she said casually. "It's just for aesthetics, clean lines." I didn't respond. I didn't trust my voice to stay steady. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and opened a drawer where I kept an old box of keepsakes. Inside were pieces of a life no one seemed to remember but me. A hospital wristband from the day Dad had surgery, and I waited all night in the lobby, a napkin with his handwriting from when he still could see, saying, "Proud of you, kid." I thought about Mom's funeral, How Seraphine had created a slideshow then, too. She picked all the pictures. Dad was barely in them. I had just assumed she forgot. Now I knew better. It wasn't forgetfulness, it was strategy. Around 10 p.m., I went to the kitchen for tea. Seraphine stood at the sink, pouring wine. I hesitated, but decided I was done avoiding. "I saw the photo," I said. She didn't turn around. And I know what you did with the album." She finally faced me, a small smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. "You've always been dramatic, Evora. The family works better when you don't interfere." Her voice was sweet, but the words landed like knives. "Just admit it," I said, my tone level. "You erased me." She chuckled, sipping her wine. "It's not about you. It's about what looks good. And let's be honest, you don't photograph well in family dynamics." I walked away before I said something I'd regret. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat beside Dad's bed and saw it, just barely, in the soft light of his lamp. A faint bruise near his left eye. My heart raced. "What happened here?" I asked. He reached up and touched the spot, confused. "Oh, must have bumped into the door frame." I hesitated. Did she push you?" He didn't respond, just turned his face toward the wall. I sat there in silence until he drifted off. My hands curled into fists in my lap. My mind raced with questions and answers I didn't want, but already knew. The next afternoon, my phone rang. I stepped outside to take it. A voice I hadn't heard in months, Marisol, our former housekeeper. "There's something you need to know," she said softly, "but I can't say it over the phone." We agreed to meet in 2 days at a local diner. That night, I started pulling open every drawer in the house I was allowed to touch. In the cabinet above the fridge, behind cereal boxes, I found them, 3 letters from the hospital, unopened. One was marked urgent. Another referenced a fall requiring an X-ray. All dated weeks ago. No one told me. I stared at the envelopes in my hand, numb. Slowly, I sat down at the table. I wasn't just being pushed out. They were rewriting the story, page by page, and I was being deleted. By the time the sun dipped behind the maple trees outside, the kitchen had gone quiet. Too quiet. The clatter of dishes had ended. The hum of small talk between Seraphine and Daryl had been replaced by a hush I knew all too well. I stepped softly through the hallway, past the room where my father was resting, and toward the back of the house. That's when I heard it, her voice. "She's going to ruin everything. I'll handle it, one way or another." It wasn't the words that chilled me. It was how calm she sounded saying them. I didn't push the door open. I didn't slam into the kitchen demanding answers. I stood there, just outside the threshold, letting the full weight of her threat settle over me. For years I had stayed quiet to keep the peace, but this wasn't peace anymore. This was war, and I wasn't about to lose it. The next morning, I rose before anyone else. I made tea the way my dad liked it, no sugar, a splash of lemon, and tiptoed into his room. He was already sitting up, the morning sun slanting through the curtain, casting lines across his face like tiny roads on a map no one else bothered to read anymore. As I set the mug on his nightstand, I heard him murmur something, so low it almost slipped past me. "I live here, but this isn't my home anymore." I froze. "Dad?" I asked gently. He turned his face toward me, but the moment was gone. What did you just say?" He shook his head, confused. "Nothing. Just talking in my sleep, I guess." But I knew that wasn't true. His voice had broken in a way you can't fake, like something long buried had cracked the surface. That afternoon, I met Marisol at a small diner on the edge of town, the kind with chipped booths and waitresses who'd seen more life than most therapists. She looked tired, older than I remembered, but her eyes still had that gentle steadiness. "Thanks for meeting me," I said, stirring cream into my coffee, trying to keep my hands from shaking. She didn't waste time. "Evora," she said, voice low. "I didn't quit. I was fired." I looked at her, confused. "Because of?" "Because I found him," she said. "Your father. Outside. Locked on the patio. In winter." I dropped my spoon. "What?" She nodded. "It was maybe 20 degrees out. He had no coat, no shoes. Said he was told to get some air." My stomach twisted. "I confronted her," Marisol continued. "Told her it was dangerous, cruel. The next morning, my access code was deactivated, my name wiped from the schedule. She pulled something from her purse, a folded piece of notebook paper. I opened it and read, "If you speak, you leave." I didn't ask who wrote it. I didn't need to. I drove home in silence, every second at a red light giving my brain more space to fill with rage. When I walked through the front door, Seraphine was laughing at something on her phone with Joran. She looked up at me and smiled like nothing had ever happened. I went straight to the kitchen. If she was going to erase things, I'd find what she missed, cabinet by cabinet, drawer by drawer. I opened the tall pantry, climbed onto the step stool, and dug behind cereal boxes. There they were, 3 envelopes, each one marked from the hospital. 2 were unopened. The third had been slit, but the letter was still sealed inside. One mentioned a fall, another spoke of a scheduled X-ray. The last referred to follow-up physical therapy. I had never been told about any of it. I carried them into the living room, where Daryl sat half watching the game. "Did you know about these?" I asked, tossing the envelopes onto the coffee table. He picked one up, glanced at it, and shrugged. "Yeah, Dad falls a lot. It happens." "It doesn't just happen, Daryl," I snapped. "He needs care. Real care." "Evora," he said, annoyed. "You're overreacting again. You always jump to conclusions." I stared at him. My brother. My father's son. "You'd rather believe I'm dramatic than admit your wife might be doing something wrong." He turned back to the TV. "I don't want to talk about this right now." Of course he didn't. That night, after they went to bed, I sat in the dim light of the living room, piecing everything together. The letters, the whisper, the threat, the silence. I pulled out a notebook and began mapping out a timeline. Every injury Dad had suffered, every time I'd been out of town, every excuse they'd given, they all aligned. Not always obviously, but enough to see a pattern. A pattern Seraphine didn't want anyone to notice. I thought of how many times I'd been told I was imagining things, that I was too sensitive, too dramatic, that my intuition was paranoia. But you don't build a case on paranoia. You build it on paper, on bruises, on notes, on forgotten envelopes behind boxes of Raisin Bran. By midnight, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going anywhere. The next morning, when Seraphine came down the stairs in her silk robe, she saw the extra pillow on the couch and the overnight bag beside it. She stopped. "This is not a hotel," she said, her voice clipped. I stood, slowly, meeting her gaze. "No, it's my father's house, and I'm staying." She said nothing, just walked into the kitchen, slamming a cabinet on her way. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced the hallway, ears perked for sounds I couldn't explain. Around 2 a.m. I passed the kitchen again. Her voice, hushed but clear, filtered through the door. "She's going to ruin everything. I'll handle it, one way or another." I didn't flinch this time. I didn't cry. I simply pressed my palm to the wall beside me and whispered, "No more silence." I meant it. After hearing Seraphine's voice slicing through the quiet kitchen, "She's going to ruin everything. I'll handle it, one way or another." Something inside me shifted. I didn't storm in. I didn't confront her. I didn't even breathe too loudly. Instead, I walked away, slowly, as if moving too fast would break something already hanging by a thread. The next morning, while Seraphine took Joran to his piano lesson and Daryl was still asleep upstairs, I walked into the home office. I didn't have to search long. She wasn't subtle. On the desk, beneath a planner and a coffee-stained post-it that read Dentist 10 a.m., was a labeled folder. Long-term care options. I opened it. Inside was a 2-page intake form for a facility called Greenwood Pines, 40 minutes away. They described themselves as a transitional memory care haven for seniors, but I'd heard of the place before, where transition meant being parked somewhere to be forgotten. Only one signature was missing, Daryl's. And next to the line that said, "Other children family consent required," the space was left blank. Not Evora in faint pencil, not a sticky note saying pending, just empty, like I didn't exist. I took a photo of every page, slowly, quietly, then put everything back exactly where I found it. That afternoon, while Daryl watched football, I called Dad's old clinic. I didn't expect much, but the nurse at the front desk remembered me. "Hi, this is Evora, Alton's daughter." I'm calling to confirm his insurance coverage? There was a pause, a few clicks of a keyboard. Looks like he's no longer with us, she finally said. My heart dropped. What do you mean? He was transferred to a different provider about 6 months ago. We sent the files over. You didn't authorize that? No, I said flatly. The new plan doesn't cover vision or outpatient elder therapy, she added. It's bare bones, honestly. Who made the switch? A pause again. It says household caregiver. No specific name. I thanked her and hung up, fists clenched tight around the phone. 6 months ago. Right around the time Dad fell and couldn't walk without help for 3 weeks. Seraphine had quietly rewritten his healthcare, just like she was rewriting his life. Later that evening, Joran found me on the back patio, sketching out a rough calendar of Dad's injuries, missed appointments, and strange behavioral shifts. He walked over, holding a Capri Sun and a chocolate chip granola bar. Want to see the drawing I made for Grandpa? He asked, holding out a crumpled sheet of paper. It was sweet, stick figures and hearts. I thanked him. Then he sat down next to me and said, Mommy says Grandpa is always in the way. I turned to him. She said that? He nodded. She said he's like a broken chair. And she said you're too emotional. That you make messes when things are just fine. My throat tightened. And what do you think? I asked. He shrugged. I think Grandpa gives the best hugs. I smiled faintly and ruffled his hair. Yeah, he does. The moment he left, I stood up and went straight into the kitchen, where Seraphine was preparing one of her carefully curated charcuterie boards, perfect as usual. Strawberries fanned out like magazine covers, crackers lined up like soldiers. You've made this house quiet, I said from the doorway, but not peaceful. She didn't look up. Still with the drama, huh? I stepped forward. You erased my name from his gift. You put up a family photo without him in it. You hid his medical records, changed his insurance. You're planning to dump him in a facility like he's expired milk. She turned slowly, setting down a cheese knife. You always did cry too easily, Evora. Touch him again, I said, voice even, and you'll see how quiet I can get, with a courtroom. She blinked, just once, then turned back to her almonds and Gouda like I hadn't spoken. I walked out, but I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired, like the war had started years ago, and I'd just finally realized I was already bleeding. That night I sat across from Daryl in the living room. The TV glowed blue, muted. I placed the printed intake form on the table between us. What's this? He asked, reaching for it. You tell me, I replied. He read, blinked, shifted. It's just a contingency, just in case. Contingency? I repeated, incredulous. That's our father. He needs professional care. We're stretched. You work full-time. I've offered to help. You shut me out. He exhaled. Seraphine just wants what's best for all of us. She wants what's easy. He didn't argue that. Do you even see what's happening? I pressed. He shook his head. Evora, you're turning this into something it's not. No, I said. I'm finally seeing it for what it is. Later that night, I went to get Dad's meds from the bathroom and saw it. The new lock on the medicine cabinet, installed fresh, gleaming like a warning. As I walked back to my room, I heard Seraphine whispering to Joran through the hallway wall. Soon, she said. It'll be just us. I paused in the dark, my father's pills still in my hand. If I couldn't speak to him, if they wouldn't let me, I would speak for him. I wasn't leaving, not this time. I didn't sleep that night. I sat upright on the living room couch, barely blinking, while the soft hum of the refrigerator echoed from the kitchen. Every once in a while, I could hear the creak of floorboards upstairs, the sound of someone shifting in bed, or pacing. Seraphine's heels had a distinctive rhythm, even in slippers. Morning came slowly. Gray light filtered in through the blinds, casting long lines across the carpet like prison bars. I stood up stiffly, stretched my back, and walked to the front window. The neighborhood looked peaceful, untouched. You'd never guess a war was quietly unfolding inside this house. Around 9, Seraphine bustled in, fully dressed in a white blouse and tan slacks, her hair curled perfectly like always. She was holding a stack of papers, talking into her Bluetooth earpiece about vendor deliveries and floral preferences. A few minutes later, she turned to me, smiling like the queen of suburbia. "We're hosting a small dinner tonight, just a few neighbors and friends, for Alton's birthday, of course. I know how much he loves being surrounded by people who care." I raised an eyebrow. People who care, or people who clap? She didn't answer, just walked away, humming. That evening, the house was lit up like a pageant. Candles on every surface, soft jazz playing through the Bluetooth speakers, and an arrangement of cheese boards and hors d'oeuvres that looked straight out of a lifestyle blog. Seraphine greeted every guest with warmth, introducing them as extended family, while Dariel nodded like a background actor. Halfway through dinner, the lights dimmed, and Seraphine tapped her fork against a wine glass. "Everyone," she said sweetly, "thank you so much for being here. Alton may not see you, but he can feel your love. We wanted to share something special." She clicked a button, and a tribute video began to play on the big screen TV. Montage after montage of neighbors speaking about how kind and strong Alton was. One even said, "You're lucky to have such wonderful children like Dariel and Seraphine." Then came a voice, familiar, mine. But only for a second. It had been chopped, edited. My full message, the one I had recorded with care, was whittled down to a few seconds, and even that sounded distant. Then came the twist, an audio clip of Alton thanking Seraphine directly. It was from an old recording, I realized, from over a year ago, but the guests didn't know that. They clapped. She beamed. My father smiled faintly, mouthing, "Thank you," not knowing any of this was a lie. I didn't say a word, not then. I smiled like everyone else. But inside, something cracked. After the guests left and the last dish was washed, I started to head upstairs. That's when I felt Seraphine's presence behind me. "You know," she said, low and calm. "This is our home. No one needs you here anymore." I turned slowly. "You're just a guest, Evora." Her words hung in the air like smoke. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The venom was in the smile, in the subtle lift of her brow. I said nothing. Not yet. But I tucked it away like a knife I'd use later. The next evening, I asked everyone to sit down after dinner. Dariel, Seraphine, and even Joran, though I sent him to play after a few minutes. Dad sat quietly at the end of the table, fingers tracing the rim of his glass. I placed the printed transfer documents in front of Dariel, then the insurance notification, then the breakdown of how my voice had been sliced out of the tribute video. I spoke calmly. I didn't raise my tone. I didn't need to. "You've changed his health care. You tried to move him into a facility. You edited a video to make it look like he only thanks you, and you erased me in the process." Dariel shifted in his seat, avoiding eye contact. Seraphine crossed her legs, unbothered. "If anything else happens to Dad," I said, "and I mean anything, I won't be kind next time." Seraphine scoffed. "Is that supposed to scare us?" "No," I said. "It's supposed to warn you." Dariel finally spoke. "Evora, you're taking this too far." I turned to him. "Look me in the eye and say you've never wondered if something was wrong." He opened his mouth, closed it, looked down. "She's making this house toxic," Seraphine interrupted. "We're done here." Silence followed. Then, without a word, Dad reached out and found my hand. He gave it 2 short squeezes. That was our signal. From when he first lost his sight. 2 squeezes. "Thank you. Keep going." After the room cleared, I helped him to bed. I tucked the blanket around his legs the way Mom used to. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. The next morning, I woke up early. The sun was barely up. I walked to the kitchen to make tea but stopped short. The house felt off, colder, emptier. I checked the couch, no sign of Dad. Panic set in. I ran upstairs calling his name. I heard water running. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Mrs. Gallagher, the neighbor 2 houses down. "You need to come home. Something's wrong." Rain had just started when I pulled out of the clinic parking lot. Fat drops hit the windshield, blurring everything outside like someone had smudged the world with their thumb. I had planned to stop for groceries, maybe some soup for Dad and a fresh notepad for my timeline journal, but then the text came through. You need to come home. Something's wrong. It was from Mrs. Gallagher, the neighbor 2 doors down. She wasn't the dramatic type, the kind of woman who'd call you about an overturned trash can, not whisper warnings. I didn't hesitate. I turned the car around, tires screeching slightly as I swung out of the lot. My phone buzzed again, battery at 4%. I didn't reply. I needed the GPS more than small talk. By the time I pulled into the driveway, it was pouring. The house stood still. No porch light, no sounds from inside. It looked abandoned. Dead. I knocked twice. No answer. I rang the bell. Still nothing. The front door was locked, so I ran around the back, stepping through puddles, breath visible in the cool air. The sliding door creaked slightly when I pushed it open. I stepped inside, immediately sensing something was off. No music, no clattering pans, no cartoon sounds from Joran's iPad. Just stillness. Dad? I called, my voice barely above a whisper. Seraphine? Nothing. Then, a sound. Water running, steady, like from a faucet left on. I moved fast through the hall and toward the kitchen, heart pounding with every step. And then I saw it. My father lay slumped on the floor near the stove, his left arm bent unnaturally, steam rising from the soaked sleeve of his shirt. Beside him stood Seraphine, both hands gripping a pot, the metal still hissing faintly. Her expression wasn't panicked. She looked composed. Too composed. What the hell did you do? I shouted, rushing toward him. She blinked. He startled me. I was cooking. He grabbed my arm. I spilled. I knelt beside my father, gently touching his shoulder. He winced, his eyes fluttering open. Don't move, I told him. I'm here. I turned back to Seraphine. Put the pot down, now. She set it on the counter without a word. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. My battery flashed red, 2%, but I got through. Emergency, the operator said. Yes, elder abuse, immediate medical help needed, I said quickly, giving the address. Severe burns, conscious but in pain, domestic incident. Help is on the way, she confirmed. I hung up and grabbed a towel from the drawer, running it under cool water, then pressing it gently over Dad's shoulder. You're blowing this up, Seraphine said behind me. It was a moment, an accident. I didn't look at her. No, it was a pattern, and I just caught the final act. I heard her inhale sharply but said nothing more. My focus was on Dad. I sat with him on the floor, whispering small reassurances, counting my own breaths to stay calm. Within 10 minutes, flashing lights painted the driveway red and blue. EMTs rushed in, professional and calm. I backed away, letting them work. Seraphine moved to follow them, but was stopped by one of the medics. Please stay back, she flared. I live here. He grabbed me. Ask him. He's confused. He does this. Her voice cracked. On cue. She's trying to take everything from me, she shouted suddenly, gesturing to me. This is manipulation. The medic looked over at me, and I calmly handed him a manila envelope from the table. These are sealed hospital letters, missed follow-ups, photos of prior bruising, and a documented transfer plan to a care facility without my consent, I said evenly. He flipped through it, nodding. Got it. We'll include this in the incident report. Alton groaned slightly as they lifted him onto the stretcher. I leaned close, holding his hand. You're okay, I whispered. I've got you. He squeezed my fingers weakly. As they wheeled him out, Seraphine turned to me, eyes wide with something between fury and disbelief. You're not going to win. I didn't flinch. I don't need to win. I just need Dad safe. She stood frozen, her jaw tight, watching the EMTs carry away the man she had spent years quietly erasing. They loaded him into the ambulance, and I followed behind in my own car, soaked from the earlier rain, heart still hammering like a war drum. The hospital visit was long. They cleaned the burns, administered pain relief, and kept him overnight for observation. He slept most of the time. I stayed beside him, watching his chest rise and fall. It was close to midnight when I drove back to the house to gather some of his belongings. I pulled into the driveway, headlights still on. That's when I saw it. Scratched deep into the windshield of my car, across the glass like a carving on stone, was one word, guest. The lines were jagged, deliberate. For a moment, I just stared at it, the rain sliding down the windows, blending with my breath fog. I got out of the car and stood there, arms at my sides, letting the last of the storm soak through my sleeves. Guessed. That's what she thought of me. But this house wasn't hers, and I was done knocking on doors that belonged to me. The morning after the ambulance took Dad away, I didn't sleep in. I couldn't. Even after staying at the hospital with him until close to 3 a.m., I was up by 7, pacing the kitchen while the coffee brewed. My hands were still trembling. The word guest was still etched into the windshield. The scratches hadn't disappeared just because the rain had. I wasn't paranoid anymore. I wasn't confused. I was angry, focused. I took my coffee and walked straight to the cabinet above the fridge. I reached behind the cereal boxes and pulled out the small black box I'd hidden weeks ago. A basic motion-activated camera. No frills, no cloud subscription, just a memory card and a date stamp. I plugged it into my laptop and waited, breath held, as the footage loaded. It didn't take long. There she was, Seraphine, in the kitchen 2 nights before the accident. The stove clicked on. She filled a pot halfway, placed it on the burner, and stood there, arms crossed, not cooking. Just waiting. Then Dad walked in, slowly, with his cane tapping gently ahead. She didn't speak. She just stared at him, jaw set. When he got close to the sink, she picked up the pot, turned, and... I stopped the video. I couldn't watch it again, but I replayed the audio. "Please, not again," Dad said. Not again. It was premeditated, controlled, calculated. I copied the footage onto a thumb drive and printed still images of the clearest moments. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was done handing her the benefit of the doubt while she handed my father pain disguised as care. That afternoon, I sent a group message. "Family meeting tonight, my place, 7 p.m., mandatory." Daryl replied with a weak thumbs up. Seraphine said nothing. By 6:50, I had everything laid out on the dining table. The photos, the letters, Marisol's note, the video loaded and paused. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Daryl arrived just after 7, still wearing his work badge, as if to signal he had better things to do. Seraphine followed a few minutes later with Joran, who she ushered toward the den with a tablet. She sat down across from me, calm as ever. Legs crossed, one eyebrow slightly raised. "You've been busy," she said, glancing at the materials. I didn't respond. I just hit play. The video rolled. No one said a word. When it ended, Daryl shifted in his chair, rubbing his temple. Seraphine remained still, unfazed. "I have letters here from 3 separate hospitals," I began. "All hidden. I have evidence of a health insurance switch that dropped Dad's coverage for therapy. I have a statement from Marisol, who found him locked outside in January, and now, this." Daryl cleared his throat. "Evora, this is a lot." "Too much to ignore," I snapped. He flinched. Seraphine smiled softly. "We all deal with stress differently. Some of us create stories, others cope quietly." I looked at her, fury searing behind my eyes. "You're not going to gaslight your way out of this." From the corner of the room, Aunt Regina, our dad's cousin, spoke up. Her voice was shaky. We all felt something was off, but it wasn't our place to intervene. "You saw it," I said quietly. "And you said nothing." Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Later that week, I stood at the front of a modest church basement, speaking into a microphone before 20 folding chairs. The local elder care group had invited me to share a personal story that could help others. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. I spoke about patterns, emotional neglect that masquerades as helpfulness, control dressed as order. When the story hit the town newsletter, it exploded. Comments poured in. "My aunt went through the same thing. My brother's wife did this to our dad. This is why we need cameras in every elder's home." Seraphine's name wasn't printed, but people knew. Small towns never really keep secrets. By Friday, she'd been asked to take a leave of absence from her PR firm. Her clients didn't want the noise. Parents at Joran's school started avoiding her in the carpool line. She looked the same. Heels, lipstick, styled hair, but something had cracked beneath the surface. You could see it in her eyes. Daryl stopped by the hospital while I was with Dad. He stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed. "Was all this worth it?" he asked. I didn't answer him. I took Dad's hand and pointed at the fresh bandages wrapped around his shoulder. Ask him. Daryl didn't come back after that. The next morning, I went out to the car and found the driver's side tires slashed. A note tucked under the wiper read, "This is your last warning." The police came. They took photos. I filed a report, said without a witness or camera, it would be hard to press charges. I knew who had done it. When questioned, Seraphine cried. "I'm a mother," she said. "I would never do something like that." I stopped sleeping upstairs. I kept the lights on at night. Every creak felt like a footstep, every shadow a threat. 3 days later, just past midnight, I heard soft feet padding toward my door. I sat up, alert. It was Joran. His hands trembled as he held the doorknob. "I shouldn't be in here," he whispered. "But Mom said Grandpa's going away soon. She said you can't stop it." I stepped out of bed, knelt down to his eye level, and placed my hand gently on his shoulder. "Want a bet?" I held Joran's trembling hands in mine for a moment longer before walking him gently back to his room. He didn't say much after that, just crawled under the covers and stared up at the ceiling like he was waiting for it to collapse. I kissed his forehead, turned off the light, and stepped into the hallway with my jaw set. The next morning, I walked into a lawyer's office downtown. A friend of a friend had recommended him, gray-haired, firm handshake, the kind of man who didn't blink when I laid out everything. "I'm not looking for vengeance," I told him. "I just want my father safe, and I want her out of his life." "You've got enough evidence for 3 cases," he said after reviewing the files. "I'll get it filed. Elder abuse, emergency order for protection. I'll make some calls." By that evening, the restraining order was official. Seraphine was legally barred from coming within 100 feet of my father or making decisions on his behalf. She hadn't come home since the day of the ambulance. I suspected she was waiting for the dust to settle, still clinging to the fantasy that everything could be spun into a misunderstanding. She was wrong. I moved Dad into a temporary care facility across town. It wasn't ideal, but it was warm, safe, and full of people trained to handle exactly this kind of trauma. They greeted us with soft voices, calm eyes, and a room that smelled like lavender instead of antiseptic. He didn't say much as I helped him settle in. But when I tucked his favorite sweater at the end of the bed, he reached out and patted my hand. "You remembered," he said. "I always remember," I whispered. Word spread fast. It always does in Cherry Hill. Within 48 hours, Seraphine's name stopped appearing in the PR firm's newsletters. Her social media accounts vanished. At the school, parents whispered at pickup. The ones who used to nod politely now avoided eye contact. The ones who once said, "You married so well," now whispered, "Did you hear what she did?" A neighbor told me she tried to plan a small charity event, but nobody RSVP'd, and yet in all that, she never called me, not once. Daryl did, though. He asked to meet, said he just needed a conversation. We sat in the back corner of a quiet diner. I didn't order anything. He did, then didn't touch it. "You've turned my life upside down," he said. "No," I replied. "I just uncovered what your silence allowed." He sat back, not defensive, not angry, just hollow. "I saw it," he admitted finally. "I just couldn't afford to believe it. You know how it would look? To the neighbors? To Joran? To Dad?" I asked. That hit him. He didn't respond. "People like Seraphine don't start with boiling water," I said. "They start with missed calls, skipped pills, a door locked too long." "And you saw it, and you let it grow." He nodded slowly, then stood up. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't say it to me," I said. "Say it to him." In court, Dad spoke briefly. Just a few words. He stood there, hands slightly shaking, wearing the same dark blazer he'd worn to Mom's funeral. "I went blind years ago," he said softly. "But I wasn't stupid. I knew what pain felt like, and I know what love sounds like." The judge didn't say much, but her eyes changed. The room shifted. The case proceeded. Formal charges followed. Later that week, I sat at my dining table and wrote an open letter. I sent it to the local newspaper under the headline, "For the Daughters Who Weren't Believed." In the piece, I told the story, not just ours, but the thousands of women who are labeled emotional, difficult, dramatic, the ones who raise alarms only to be silenced, The ones who watch their parents fade while pretending everything is fine. It ran online that Friday. By Saturday morning, my inbox was full. Thank you for saying what I couldn't. You gave my mother a voice. My sister's going through this right now. Some stories were worse than mine. Some were eerily similar. But all of them shared the same ending. Silence that had lasted too long, and someone finally brave enough to break it. 2 weeks passed. Dad and I moved into a small rental home near the edge of town. One level, wide doorways, lots of windows. I bought him a new recliner. We set up a small kitchen garden. I let him pick the herbs. One evening, as the air grew cool and the last of the sunlight spilled across our tiny backyard, I walked him out to sit under the patio awning. The grass still had that late spring smell, earthy, hopeful. He leaned back in his chair and sighed, his hands folded over his stomach. You think this peace will last? He asked quietly. I looked around, at the garden, the wind chimes, the absence of control and cruelty. We don't need it to last, I said, just to be real. After my father asked if the peace would last, I didn't rush to answer. Instead, I let the breeze carry that question with it for a few seconds, like it needed time to settle in the space between us. We sat quietly on the back porch of our new home, the wood creaking gently beneath our chairs, the sun dimming just enough to remind us the day was nearing its end. No, I finally said. We don't need it to last, just to be real. That was enough. He nodded, just once, and we both returned to watching the little patch of garden we'd started together. Later that evening, as I was folding laundry in the den, I found myself drifting into a memory from weeks earlier, one that had stayed with me like a stone in my pocket. It had been a night when the pain in Dad's arm from the burn was still fresh, and the air in the house was thick with fear. He had been lying in bed, barely able to turn his head. I had just changed his bandages, and I remember sitting down next to him, exhausted. That's when he reached out and whispered something I hadn't repeated to anyone until now. If you want to save me, he had said, don't just save my body, save my story. That line stuck with me. It was the anchor I didn't realize I needed. The fight had been about so much more than a fall or a burn or an insurance form. It was about the right to exist fully, even when people decide you're inconvenient. It was about memory, dignity, about making sure that one day, when Dad is no longer here, what happened to him and what we fought against doesn't disappear. In our new home, life settled into a rhythm I hadn't known I needed. We weren't rich. The house was small, tucked on the edge of a quiet street just outside Cherry Hill, but it was bright, peaceful, clean in ways that had nothing to do with bleach. Dad and I had our routines, morning walks when his knees allowed, audiobooks in the afternoon, and simple dinners that we cooked together. He loved stirring the sauce, even when he couldn't see it, and I let him. Some nights, we'd sit out back and just listen to the wind move through the leaves. Seraphine wasn't allowed within 500 feet of either of us. The restraining order made that clear. And for the first time in years, I didn't have to look over my shoulder in my own kitchen. A few weeks after we moved in, I found a white envelope taped to the door. No return address, no knock, just a folded piece of paper inside. It was from Daryl. He hadn't spoken to me since the court hearings. I wasn't sure if he'd ever be able to, but the letter said more than he ever could have with his voice. You did what I couldn't, it began. You saw what I wouldn't. I was supposed to protect him, but I was paralyzed by fear and pride. I'm sorry. There were no excuses, no explanations, just truth. I didn't cry when I read it, not right away. I just stood at the door for a long time, holding the paper in my hands like it might disappear if I blinked. Days turned into weeks. I started volunteering at a local elder advocacy center. I helped install cameras for other families, small, discreet ones, so that no one would have to rely on hope alone to prove abuse. I gave talks, met daughters like me, and learned how widespread this problem really was. At one of those workshops, someone asked me, "Do you regret it? Breaking the family?" I smiled. Not bitter, not angry, just tired. Families that hide rot, I said, aren't broken when exposed. They're cleansed. Seraphine's name didn't appear in local headlines anymore. She was just another woman pushing a grocery cart at odd hours, walking alone in the park with earbuds in, rarely seen with Joran. Her smile, when it happened, was thin, distant. A brief note ran in the local paper. Seraphine M. pleads no contest in elder abuse case. Fined, relocated. Custody of minor child reviewed. No jail. But no community either. It was the kind of justice that doesn't come with handcuffs, but with empty rooms. That autumn, on a golden afternoon, Dad sat on the porch, listening to a recording I had made for him. It was Joran, reading a short poem he wrote at school. Leaves fall but don't break. They dance and turn and take the wind's hand for a while, just enough to smile. Dad closed his eyes as the words played. When the recording stopped, he let out a soft breath and said, "There's hope after all." I looked at him, my throat tightening. "We didn't fix everything," I said, "but we didn't let it stay broken either." That evening, I returned to an old habit. I pulled out the leather-bound journal I had once given Dad before his vision failed. I had taken to writing in it again, this time from both our perspectives. Notes about the day, things he said, favorite meals we shared. That afternoon, the last entry was simple. He smiled at the sound of Joran's voice. That was enough. I closed the journal and sat back. The house was quiet, not empty. The kind of silence that holds, not harms. A breeze moved through the backyard, and I watched it ruffle the wind chimes, soft and unpredictable. Peace wasn't a place. It was a choice I made, even when no one else did. Sometimes, the hardest battles aren't the ones fought in court, but the ones we fight inside our own families. This story wasn't just about abuse. It was about the silence that allowed it to grow, and the courage it takes to break that silence when no one else will. What would you do if speaking up meant tearing your family apart, just to protect the one person who never stopped loving you? If this story moved you or made you think, share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. We have more real, powerful stories coming your way.